I was on call in the emergency room, close to midnight, fighting to save a patient's life when two new victims of a car crash were brought in. To my shock, they were my husband and my sister-in-law, a woman I had cherished in my heart. Seeing them, I didn't cry or scream. I just managed an icy smile that chilled me to the bone, and then I did something my in-laws still can't believe. That night, like any other shift in the ER, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptics, blood, and fear. The rhythmic beeping of monitors, the frantic shuffle of footsteps, and the groans of patients blended into a chaotic symphony of life and death. I had just finished stitching a complex laceration and, as I peeled off my blood-stained gloves, I was about to step outside for a breath of fresh air. But before I could cross the threshold, the wail of an ambulance siren screamed with urgency just outside. "Dr. Hayes, we've got a major MVC. 2 victims, a man and a woman, inbound now." A charge nurse informed me, her voice tense. In an instant, the exhaustion vanished from my body. I quickly pulled my white coat back on, snapped on a fresh pair of gloves, and rushed toward the ambulance bay. This was our battlefield, a place where there was no time for weariness. 2 gurneys rolled in almost simultaneously. A woman lay on the first. Her long hair was matted with blood, and her expensive-looking red silk dress was torn in several places, revealing bleeding abrasions on her arms and legs. She was unconscious and her breathing was shallow, but what made me freeze wasn't her condition, it was the intense, seductive perfume wafting from her. It was Chanel No. 5, the same fragrance I had to special order a limited edition of just a month ago as a birthday present for my sister-in-law, Isabelle Warren. My heart plummeted into my stomach. I moved closer and brushed the bloody hair from her face. My God, it was Isabelle. It was her. I stood there, frozen. But just then, the second gurney came to a halt beside me. The man on it was in worse shape. A white bandage, already soaked with blood, was wrapped around his head. His designer shirt was ripped, revealing a terrible contusion across his chest. His face was pale, but his features were unmistakable. The straight nose, the thin lips, the strong brows, how could I not recognize him? It was Julian Warren, my husband, the man I had shared my life with, for the past 5 years. He had told me that tonight he had a meeting with an important client from out of state and would be back very late. And now here he was, next to his own sister, in a deplorable state from a midnight crash. Why? Why were they together? Isabelle's perfume, the strong stench of alcohol coming from Julian, the disarray of their clothes. Suddenly, all the pieces exploded in my mind, locking into a truth so raw and brutal it left me breathless. So that was it. His important client was his delicate sister. His all-night meeting had been a pleasure-filled evening somewhere I knew nothing about. Pain and betrayal burned in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake and demand an explanation. But I am Dr. Eleanor Hayes, and this is the ER. I looked at Isabelle's unconscious face and then at Julian, who was groaning in pain, and without realizing it, a cold smile formed on my lips. It wasn't a smile of satisfaction, but the final, grim revelation of someone who had been deceived for far too long. For the last 5 years, I had lived like a shadow in my own home. As an ER doctor, I saved lives day and night, yet I barely received any attention from my own husband. He was always busy, always had an excuse, and his biggest excuse was always Isabelle. Isabelle is still young, she lost her parents as a child, and she's very fragile. If I don't take care of her, who will? He had told me countless times. And I believed him. I believed in the innocence of that sister-in-law with her big, teary eyes. I believed in my husband's kindness. I sacrificed my time, postponed dates, and accepted solitary dinners to give him time to care for his poor sister. It turned out that care was the kind given in the bed of a luxury hotel, paid for with the money I earned with my own blood, sweat, and tears. "Doctor, the female patient is showing signs of internal bleeding. BP is crashing." A nurse's voice snapped me back to reality. Every eye in the trauma bay was on me, waiting for my orders. I took a deep breath. The cold hospital air filled my lungs, extinguishing the fire of rage inside me. I saw those 2 people, the 2 who had betrayed me, together lying weakly on the threshold of death, and I turned to my team. My voice was chillingly clear, cool, and professional. "Prep or 2. We'll take the female patient first. Her condition is more critical. For the male patient, start him on oxygen and an IV drip, and get him to CT for a head scan immediately. I'll deal with him later." With that, I turned and began pushing Isabelle's gurney toward the operating room with my team, leaving Julian behind under the bewildered stares of the nurses. They didn't understand. How could a wife be so calm seeing her husband in critical condition? Why did I choose to save the other woman first? But only I understood. This wasn't a wife's choice, it was a doctor's decision. More importantly, it was my silent declaration of war, my first move against those who had turned my life into a joke. Your little play is over. From tonight on, I'm rewriting the script. The heavy doors of the operating room swung shut, isolating me from the outside world and from the sight of my husband, motionless on his gurney. But in that moment, I didn't feel a shred of concern for him in my heart. Instead, my mind automatically rewound, like an old film, to 5 years ago, to the day I first set foot in that house. The bright surgical lights above my head faded, superimposed by the dazzling sun of a summer afternoon. It was the day Julian first took me to his home to introduce me to his family. I vividly remember my nerves. I wore my favorite light blue floral dress and clutched a carefully wrapped gourmet gift basket, mentally reminding myself to be polite and thoughtful to make a good impression on my future in-laws. The Julian of back then was the embodiment of everything I had ever dreamed of. He was tall, handsome, spoke elegantly, and always looked at me with loving eyes. He told me his family was well-educated and traditional, that his parents were very kind, and that he had a younger sister, Isabelle, who was the family's treasure because she had been orphaned as a child. He insisted that I must treat Isabelle very well. I believed him. I believed every word he said. The house where his family lived wasn't huge, a modest suburban home on a quiet street. His mother, Carol Warren, greeted me with a sociable smile. She wasn't particularly enthusiastic, but she didn't show any discomfort either. She asked me a few questions about my job and my family and nodded, saying that being a doctor was a good profession for saving lives, but for some reason, I felt an invisible distance in her words. And then Isabelle appeared. She came out of her room in an immaculate white dress, her long black hair falling to her shoulders. She had large, round, clear eyes and a smile so innocent it could melt the hardest heart. She ran to hug Julian and said in a honey-sweet voice, "Brother, you're here. I missed you." Then she turned to me, batted her eyelashes, and said, "So this is Ellie. She's gorgeous." At that moment, I was completely fooled by her pure appearance. I thought she was truly pitiable, a poor orphan girl. I promised myself that when I became her sister-in-law, I would treat her like my own flesh and blood, making up for all the emotional voids she had suffered. Oh, how naive and foolish the me of 5 years ago was. I didn't realize that behind those clear eyes hid an abyss of calculation and jealousy. Our wedding took place shortly after. I invested almost all my savings, accumulated over years of hard work, to prepare a decent wedding with Julian. I wanted his family to feel proud in front of their relatives and friends. On the wedding day, Isabelle also wore a white bridesmaid's dress. She cried her eyes out when Julian put the ring on my finger. Everyone said she was crying with joy to see her brother find happiness. Only I caught a strange look in her eyes for a fleeting moment, a look I would only understand later. It was one of regret and hatred. But the bride's happiness soon made me forget that unease. In my early days as a daughter-in-law, I did everything I could to adapt. No matter how tough the work at the hospital was or how many shifts I had, I would wake up at 5 a.m. to go to the market and prepare breakfast for the whole family. No matter how tired I came back at night, I would rush to the kitchen to cook Julian's and his family's favorite dishes. I bought my mother-in-law the best nutritional supplements and my father-in-law the set of fine cigars he had always wanted. I treated Isabelle even better than a sister. New clothes. Expensive cosmetics, I denied her nothing. I did all this without a single complaint. I just wanted to be accepted, to feel the warmth of a family. But all I received in return was indifference. My mother-in-law never praised me. No matter how delicious my food was, she would just eat in silence and occasionally remark, "This is a bit salty," or, "The soup is bland today." She never asked if my job was hard or if I was struggling. In her eyes, I, a life-saving doctor, seemed to be nothing more than the family's unpaid maid. And Julian, my husband, where was he during those moments? He was there. He sat beside me at every meal, but he never said a word in my defense. When his mother unfairly criticized me, he would just lower his head and eat. When I was exhausted after a long shift, he wouldn't offer a single word of comfort. He only knew how to say one thing. Just be patient. Mom's just like that, but deep down, she really loves her daughter-in-law. It seemed all his love was reserved for his adopted sister, Isabelle. Isabelle did absolutely nothing at home. She would wake up at 9 or 10 a.m. After eating, she would go back to her room, close the door, and spend the day on her phone or go out with friends. My mother-in-law always defended her. Leave her be. She's just a child. What does she know? Besides, she's always been delicate. She can't do heavy work. Delicate. And I, who had just finished an 8-hour emergency surgery, was a rock. The favoritism became more and more blatant. Once, I caught a bad cold with a terrible fever and couldn't get out of bed. I asked Julian to make me some soup. He said yes and went downstairs to the kitchen. Half an hour later, there was no soup. But Isabelle came up with a bowl of steaming chicken soup, set it on the nightstand, and said in her sweet voice, "Sister-in-law, drink this while it's hot." It seemed my brother was fumbling, so I made it myself. At that moment, I almost cried with emotion. I thought someone in this house finally cared about me. But that night, as I passed by my mother-in-law's room, I happened to overhear her conversation with Isabelle. "Mom, you see? I told you, you have to let that woman get really sick to knock some sense into her. A woman who only thinks about work and can't even make a decent meal for her husband. My poor brother." Isabelle's voice was no longer innocent but filled with sarcasm. My mother-in-law replied, pleased. "My little girl is the best. Come on, tomorrow, Mom will buy you a new purse." I stood frozen outside the door. The bowl of soup I had held in my hands that morning suddenly turned into bitter poison in my throat. So that was it. It was all an act. They, the mother-in-law and sister-in-law, had been conspiring to portray me as useless in my husband's eyes. I wanted to storm in and expose them, but I didn't. I knew that if I did, Julian wouldn't believe me. He would think I was jealous of his poor sister, that I was being petty. I chose silence. I swallowed my tears. I consoled myself that as long as Julian still loved me, everything would be fine. But I didn't know that my silence that day was a form of tolerating evil. And so it grew, day by day, and on this fateful night, it exploded, shattering everything. Iscalpel. My voice, echoing in the operating room, pulled me out of the painful stream of memories. I looked at Isabelle's wound, from which blood was still seeping. The hatred inside me suddenly calmed, leaving only a doctor's sense of responsibility. Her life was now in my hands. But if I saved her, would she repent, or would it be the beginning of an even crueler conspiracy? Isabelle's surgery lasted over 3 hours. She had a ruptured spleen, which caused severe internal bleeding. It was a complex operation that required extreme concentration. And during those 3 hours, I erased all personal feelings from my mind. Before me was not the sister-in-law who had betrayed me with my husband, but simply a patient, a life that needed to be saved. I worked with all the professionalism and ethics of a doctor. I meticulously sutured every ruptured blood vessel, stopped the bleeding, and treated the wound with the utmost care. When I finished the last stitch, I let out a sigh of relief and felt all the energy drain from my body. The surgery was a success. Isabelle was out of danger. I walked out of the operating room. The dim light of the hallway hurt my eyes. As I removed my sweat-soaked surgical mask, the cold air hit my face. Just then, a figure rushed towards me. Before I could react, a sharp slap landed on my cheek. "You monster! What have you done to my daughter?" It was Carol Warren, my mother-in-law. She stood there, eyes wide, her face contorted with rage. The slap was so sudden and painful that I stumbled, but I didn't cry or raise a hand to my face. I simply stood tall, looked her straight in the eye, and said in an icy voice, "Your daughter? I just saved her life." Mrs. Warren was speechless for a moment. She probably didn't expect me to react so calmly. She was used to the submissive, obedient daughter-in-law. This Eleanor Hayes, with her sharp gaze and firm voice, was a stranger to her. "You're lying," she stammered. "If you saved her, why did it take so long? You did it on purpose, to torture her, right?" I gave a mocking smile. "Feel free to ask the Chief of Emergency Services, who was with me in the operation. If I had taken any longer, you probably wouldn't have the opportunity to insult me here right now." Just then, Dr. Matthew Carter, whom I had always considered my mentor and a respected colleague, came out of the recovery room. He had heard our conversation and approached with a frown. "Mrs. Warren, what is this commotion? This is a hospital." Mrs. Warren flinched a little upon seeing Dr. Carter but still pointed at me indignantly. "Doctor, look at my daughter-in-law. Her husband is lying in there after an accident, and she doesn't even care. She spent hours in surgery operating on someone else. What kind of wife is that?" Dr. Carter looked at me with understanding and then addressed Mrs. Warren sternly. Ma'am, I believe there's a misunderstanding. The female patient arrived in a much more critical condition. Dr. Hayes's decision to prioritize her surgery was completely in line with emergency protocol. She did an excellent job. If it weren't for her, the patient's life would have been in grave danger. You should be grateful to your daughter-in-law. Every word from Dr. Carter was like a bucket of cold water on Mrs. Warren's anger. She was speechless, unable to retort. Her face went from red to pale in a pitiful display. She shot me a murderous look and stormed off towards Julian's room. I watched her go, feeling not satisfaction, but an infinite weariness. What had I sacrificed for this family? I worked day and night to cover the expenses of the entire household. I had silently endured their contempt and criticism for the past 5 years, and in the end, in their eyes, I was still an insignificant daughter-in-law, a harbinger of bad luck. The truth is, without me, this family would be nothing. I remembered the day we decided to buy a new house in a residential neighborhood. Julian was a simple sales representative, and his salary barely covered expenses. The down payment of $165,000 came entirely from my savings money I had earned through sleepless nights on call and hurried meals at the hospital. But when it came to signing the deed, Julian said to me, "Why don't we put it in both our names? We're a married couple, and it will make my parents feel more at ease." I agreed without a second thought. I thought the house was ours, that money wasn't more important than feelings. And the car Julian drives now. I bought that for him too. He said he needed it for work, to make a good impression on clients. I agreed again. I gave him a family credit card so he could spend money without having to ask me. I thought that if my husband was successful, I would also feel proud. And Isabelle, that fragile sister-in-law, her private school tuition, the summer study abroad program in Europe, the designer clothes, the expensive handbags, where did all that come from? My pocket. Every time she wheedled something from her brother, Julian would turn to me and say, "Come on, give her a little, poor thing." And I would soften again. I considered her my real sister. I wanted her to live without want, without feeling disadvantaged. It turns out, I wasn't just supporting my husband and my in-laws, but also my husband's mistress. I was nothing more than a walking ATM, an ATM that could walk, work, and even endure. My generosity, my sacrifice, was stupidity in their eyes. They had grown accustomed to taking without giving. They had grown accustomed to me always being in the background, silently propping up their life of luxury and vain appearances. I gave them everything, and in return, I received the bitterest of betrayals. "Ellie, go get some rest. You look terrible." Dr. Carter's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I nodded, thanked him, and walked heavily to the doctor's lounge. I needed to rest, not because of physical exhaustion, but because my soul was weary. But I knew I couldn't break down now. The play had only just begun. The evidence I had just remembered, the injustices I had suffered, all of it would be fuel for the vengeance to come. They were used to the docile, patient Eleanor Hayes? Perfect. I was about to show them a completely different Eleanor. An Eleanor whose very name would make them tremble. I didn't go straight to the lounge. Instead, I headed to Julian's room, where he was under observation after his CT scan. The door to the room was slightly ajar, and from inside came a mixture of my mother-in-law's sobs and my father-in-law's deep voice. "Carol, stop crying. Making a scene isn't going to solve anything. The doctor said Julian only has a mild concussion." "His life isn't in danger," said Richard Warren. "Not in danger? Then why does he look like that? With his head bandaged up. It's all because of her. Ever since she set foot in this house, we haven't had a single day of peace." Mrs. Warren's voice was still laced with venom. I stood silently outside the door, clenching my fists. Even in a situation like this, she still placed all the blame on me. "Quiet down." Mr. Warren snapped. "What if the doctors hear you? Do you think I don't know about Julian and Isabelle? You encouraged them, and now that it's all blown up, you're blaming Ellie? Do you realize how irrational you are?" I was stunned. My father-in-law knew. He knew about the affair between Julian and Isabelle. Then why had he remained silent all this time? "What do you mean, I encouraged them?" Mrs. Warren's voice sounded somewhat guilty. "I only did it because I felt sorry for Isabelle. What's wrong with Julian taking care of his sister a little? Don't accuse me unfairly." "Sorry for her?" Mr. Warren scoffed. "Look at how she spends money. Designer clothes, the latest phone. Where do you think all that comes from? Do you think I'm old and clueless? It's all Ellie's money. She works herself to the bone to support this entire household, her husband, and her sister-in-law. And you treat her worse than a stranger. Don't you think you're being too cruel? Every word from my father-in-law was like a hammer blow to my chest, but not a blow of pain of astonishment. In this cold house, there was at least one person who recognized my efforts and sacrifice. Even though he had never said it, he knew. Mrs. Warren fell silent. She probably didn't expect her husband to say something like that. After a moment, she screamed acrimoniously. How nice of you, defending her. Is she your daughter-in-law or your daughter? Don't you think about this family's reputation? If this gets out, where are we going to hide our faces? Reputation? Mr. Warren's voice was filled with sarcasm. Did you think about reputation when your son was sneaking into hotels with his sister? Did you think about reputation when you were buying things for your son's mistress with your daughter-in-law's money? And now you're ashamed? It's too late. Their conversation was interrupted by a groan from Julian. Dad. Mom. My head hurts so much. I heard the sound of a chair moving and hurried footsteps. I knew I shouldn't listen anymore. I turned away silently, but my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. My father-in-law, whom I had considered a patriarchal, reserved man in cahoots with his wife, turned out to be the only one who understood me. But why did he choose silence? Was there a deeper reason? I went to Dr. Matt Carter's office. I needed to know more about Julian's condition. Dr. Carter was looking at the CT scan images. Seeing me enter, he pointed to a chair. Sit down. I was just about to call you. How is he? I asked. He got lucky, Dr. Carter said, not hiding a hint of irony. Mild concussion, minimal epidural hematoma. With a few days of observation, he can go home. The impact was mainly because he wasn't wearing his seatbelt, and his blood alcohol level was quite high. No seatbelt, high alcohol level. Every clue confirmed what I already knew. They had a night of fun and recklessness and were now paying the price. And the girl? I asked, forcing myself to maintain an indifferent tone. She's much worse. Besides the ruptured spleen, she has 2 fractured ribs and a pulmonary contusion. She'll need to be hospitalized for at least a couple of weeks. You acted just in time, otherwise, the outcome would have been uncertain. Dr. Carter looked at me with concern. Ellie, I know how hard this is for you, but you have to stay strong. If you need anything, just let me know. Thanks, Matt. I managed a tired smile. I'm fine. It's just. As the attending physician and a family member, could I review the personal effects of both patients to contact family or find any necessary documents? Dr. Carter hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right. Technically it's against regulations, but in this case, it seems necessary. Go to administration and tell them I gave you permission. I knew I was bending the rules, but I had to. I had to find out where they had been, what they had done. I needed irrefutable proof to end this charade once and for all. I went to administration. The nurse on duty looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. She handed me 2 sealed plastic bags. One was Julian's, the other Isabelle's. I took them. They felt strangely heavy. I didn't open them right away. I took them to the deserted doctor's lounge and locked the door. I sat in a chair, took a deep breath, and only then did I slowly open Julian's bag. Inside was the crocodile leather wallet I gave him for our 3rd anniversary, the latest model iPhone with a cracked screen, and a set of keys. I opened the wallet. Besides his ID and some cards, I found something that froze my heart. It wasn't a picture of me or a family photo. It was a small picture of Isabelle at the beach in a sexy bikini, smiling radiantly. The photo was slightly worn, its edges frayed. How long had he been carrying it in his wallet? I felt a surge of rage and disgust, but I suppressed it. I put the photo down and opened Isabelle's bag. Inside was also a broken phone, a designer wallet, and some jewelry. But when I emptied the bag, other items fell onto the table that made my skin crawl. A hotel room keycard with the logo of the Golden Horizon Resort and Spa, a luxurious resort on the outskirts of the city. A box of the morning after pill, already opened. And a receipt. I picked up the receipt. The numbers and letters on it seemed to dance before my eyes. It was the bill for a 2-day, 1-night stay in the presidential suite, with additional services like wine, a romantic candlelit dinner, and a couple's spa treatment. The total amount came to almost $3,300. And the payer was Julian Warren. Now, everything was too clear. Everything was laid bare. They weren't just seeing each other secretly, they were going on romantic getaways with my money. While I was killing myself between shifts and family worries, they were living like a real married couple. I sat there amidst the evidence of betrayal. I didn't cry or scream. I just felt a terrifying emptiness. But in that emptiness, an idea, a plan began to germinate. She had been left speechless, but I knew this was just the beginning, and what I was about to discover in their belongings would be the real proof that would chill me to the bone. I sat motionless in the doctor's lounge. The cold fluorescent light illuminated the proof of betrayal scattered across the table, the resort receipt, the pill box, Isabelle's photo in Julian's wallet. Each object seemed to scream, mocking my stupidity over the last 5 years. I had thought the greatest pain was seeing them together, but no. The greatest pain was realizing the deception had been meticulously planned, executed behind my back, and financed with the money I earned with my own sweat and tears. I no longer felt pain, only a chilling rage that seeped into my bones. I wasn't going to let this end so easily. They had hurt me too much. They had to pay an equivalent price. I carefully collected everything and used my phone to photograph every detail of the receipt, the pill box, and the photo. I knew these would be my sharpest weapons in the battle to come. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wouldn't show them my anger. I would continue to play the role of the compassionate wife, the generous sister-in-law. I would let them gloat, let them lower their guard, and when they least expected it, I would deliver the final blow. I deleted all the photos I had just taken from my gallery and moved them to a hidden, password-protected folder. Then I returned the 2 bags of belongings to administration, saying I hadn't found any useful information. I had to erase all traces. No one could know that I knew everything. I went back to Julian's room. Mrs. Warren was still sitting there with a sour face. Mr. Warren was silently reading a newspaper. Seeing me enter, Mrs. Warren glanced at me and then turned her head away. I didn't say anything either. I quietly approached the bed and checked Julian's foredrip. He was still asleep, his breathing regular. Looking at the face that had once made me swoon, I now felt only strangeness and repulsion. I forced a worried expression and asked Mr. Warren, "Dad, did the doctor say when Julian will wake up?" Mr. Warren folded his newspaper and looked at me. There was an apology in his eyes. "The doctor says probably this afternoon. You've been up all night. Why don't you go home and get some rest? We'll stay here." "No, Dad." I shook my head and said in a weak voice, "How can I rest peacefully with Julian like this? It's better for me to stay here in case I can help with anything." I knew I had to stay to play my part perfectly, to show them my loyalty and generosity, and more importantly, to observe and find out more. I wanted to know how they would treat me after all this. That afternoon, Julian woke up. The first thing he did wasn't to ask for me, but to look around for someone else. "Isabelle. Where's Isabelle? Is she okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse and full of concern. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my heart, but I maintained my composure. "Isabelle is fine. I just operated on her. She's in recovery now, under observation." Hearing me, Julian let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much, Ellie," he said, taking my hand with a look full of gratitude. But I knew that gratitude wasn't for me, but for saving his mistress. I silently pulled my hand away. "Rest. Don't talk too much, you'll tire yourself out." Mrs. Warren, seeing her son awake, rushed over happily to ask how he was. But her first question also wasn't about her son's health. "Julian, tell Mom how you two ended up like this. Did this Ellie do something to make you angry and leave the house?" I stood there, listening to her words, and couldn't help but laugh inwardly. Even in this situation, she was still finding a way to blame me. Julian seemed flustered. He glanced at me, then at his mother. "No, Mom, it was my fault." "Your fault? What nonsense!" Mrs. Warren snapped. "Don't I know you? I'm your mother. Your wife must have done something wrong, made you angry, and that's why you're—" "Mom! Enough!" Julian interrupted her suddenly. It was the first time in 5 years I had seen him do that. He turned to me with a complex look. There was guilt, but also something like fear. "Ellie? I'm sorry." His apology didn't move me. On the contrary, it put me more on guard. Why was he apologizing? Was he afraid I would spill everything? Or was there another conspiracy behind that apology? I didn't answer, just turned away silently. I went to Isabelle's recovery room. I had to check on her. When I arrived, Isabelle had also just woken up from the surgery. She was weak and pale, with no trace of her usual arrogance and defiance. Seeing me, her eyes widened, and after a flash of surprise, her gaze turned wary. "Sister-in-law. What are you doing here?" she asked in a thin voice. I pulled up a chair and sat by her bed. "I came to see if you were dead," I said in an icy voice. Isabelle turned pale as a ghost and went rigid. "Sister-in-law. What are you saying? I can't hear you clearly." I smiled. "I asked if you were dead. If not, it's a pity. If you were dead, everything would be so much simpler." The fragile expression vanished from Isabelle's face, replaced by anger. "How dare you?" "Oh, I dare," I interrupted. "And not just with words, but with actions too. I saved your life, so I can also take it away. Easy, don't you think?" I leaned close to her face and whispered menacingly in her ear. "Don't think I don't know about the beautiful things you and your dear brother have been doing behind my back. The Golden Horizon Resort, the morning after pill, need I go on?" Isabelle's whole body trembled violently. She looked at me in disbelief, her eyes filled with fear and panic. "How? How did you know?" "I know a lot more than you think." I straightened up, resuming my cold, doctorly expression. "I'm giving you one chance. Either you tell me everything, or I'll make sure the rest of your life in this hospital is worse than death. Your choice." With that, I turned and left, leaving Isabelle engulfed in absolute terror. I knew I was doing something very dangerous. I was threatening my patient. But I had no other choice. To protect myself, sometimes I had to become a beast too. And I had a feeling that the relationship between Julian and Isabelle wasn't just a simple affair. There was a much darker secret behind it, and only Isabelle could give me the answer. My threat seemed to work. Throughout that night, Isabelle had a panic attack. Her blood pressure spiked, and she showed signs of a post-surgical infection. The on-call nurse had to call me back to the hospital in the middle of the night. When I entered, Isabelle was curled up on the bed, trembling from head to toe, her eyes wide with fear. Seeing me was like seeing a ghost, and she quickly pulled the blanket over her head. I gestured for the nurse to leave. I pulled up a chair and sat watching her in silence. I said nothing, letting the silence and her own fear do their work. After a long time, unable to bear the suffocating quiet, Isabelle peeked her head out from under the blanket and looked at me with pleading eyes. "Sister-in-law. Please. I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you everything." I continued to wait in silence. "This isn't just about me and Julian," Isabelle began, trembling with fear. His mother. Your mother-in-law. She knew everything. She was the one who planned it all." I froze. Carol Warren, my mother-in-law. That woman who always appeared strict and moralistic was the one pulling the strings of this sinful relationship. "Continue," I ordered, my voice expressionless. Shaking, Isabelle told me everything. Her relationship with Julian had begun before I married him. They had been in love since college, but Mrs. Warren had been firmly against it because Isabelle was an orphan and her family background wasn't up to par. She forced Julian to break up with Isabelle and marry me, a woman with a stable job, high income, and a normal family, to get a shield and someone to financially support the family. But because she couldn't bear to see her son suffer, she allowed them to continue seeing each other behind my back. She told Isabelle, "You just be his mistress in the shadows. Don't worry, wait a few years, and when that Eleanor Hayes gives this house a child, I'll find a way to kick her out, so you two can be together officially." Hearing those words, I felt my blood run cold. It was a cruel and perfect conspiracy. They had turned me into a tool, a birthing machine, an ATM. They had used my love and sacrifice for their dirty plan. They had calculated everything, except for one thing, that I couldn't have children. "And why now?" I asked hoarsely. "Why the rush to go on a trip? Why were you so reckless as to get into an accident?" Isabelle hesitated for a moment, then confessed something even more terrible. "Because I was pregnant." Pregnant. The word rang in my ears like thunder. I looked at Isabelle's abdomen, still bandaged from the surgery. "But you just had a ruptured spleen." "How?" "Not anymore," Isabelle interrupted in a low voice. "I was almost 3 months along. Because of the accident, I lost it." I jumped to my feet. The chair fell backward with a crash. My whole body was trembling violently. I had saved her, but I hadn't been able to save an innocent life that was not at fault. I, a doctor, didn't know my patient was pregnant. The doctor didn't know. Isabelle looked at me in surprise. "When they did the abdominal ultrasound before the surgery, didn't they see it?" Ultrasound. I remembered the situation at that moment. It was an extreme emergency. I was only focused on finding the source of the bleeding. I had no time to notice anything else. His mother. Your mother-in-law knew I was pregnant, Isabelle continued. She was the one who rushed us to go on vacation, to rest and get away from you. She said that as soon as I gave birth to a boy, she would tell Julian to divorce you, that your assets, the house, the car, everything would end up belonging to Julian and our son. I couldn't listen anymore. I stumbled out of the room, leaning on the wall to keep from falling. Everything had surpassed the limits of my endurance. The betrayal, the deceit, the calculation, all taken to the extreme. They didn't just want to take my husband, but also my child, if I had had one, and my assets. They were a pack of demons in human skin. I ran to the bathroom and vomited violently. I threw up everything in my stomach, and with it, all the bitterness and anger I had suppressed for the last 5 years. When there was nothing left to vomit, I collapsed onto the cold floor and burst into tears. I cried like a child. I cried for my fate, for the baby that never saw the light of day. I cried for everything, but between sobs, I saw my reflection in the mirror opposite me. A pathetic, pitiful woman with swollen eyes and a tear-streaked face. No. I couldn't break down like this. I couldn't let them get away with it. I had cried enough. From this moment on, there would be no more tears, only hatred, and a ruthless plan for revenge. I stood up, washed my face, and stared at my eyes in the mirror, bloodshot, but now sharp. Eleanor Hayes, you have to live. You have to live to make them pay. And I knew that to carry out this plan, I couldn't do it alone. I needed an ally. And at this moment, the only person I could trust, the only person with the strength and understanding to help me, was my father-in-law, Richard Warren. Mrs. Warren had calculated everything, but she had made one fatal mistake, underestimating her husband's silence. The next morning, I woke up with an unusual mental clarity. The previous night's tears seemed to have washed away all the weakness and doubt within me. Now, only one goal remained in my mind, to make those who had hurt me pay. I knew that to confront someone as cunning as Mrs. Warren, hatred wasn't enough. I needed a perfect, flawless plan, and for that, I needed the help of my father-in-law, Richard Warren. Taking advantage of Mrs. Warren being out running errands, I waited until midday to visit Julian's room. Mr. Warren was sitting there, quietly peeling an apple for his son. Seeing me enter, he looked up with slight surprise in his eyes. I said nothing, just pulled up a chair and sat opposite him. "Dad," I began, my voice calm and clear. "I need to talk to you." Mr. Warren put down the knife and the apple and looked at me intently. "Go on, I'm listening." I didn't beat around the bush. I told him everything Isabelle had confessed to me the night before. I spoke of Mrs. Warren's conspiracy, of how she knew and condoned the relationship between Julian and Isabelle even before our marriage. I spoke of her plan to turn me into a birthing machine and an ATM. And finally, I spoke of Isabelle's lost child and how Mrs. Warren had promised to pave the way for her and her child to replace me. As I spoke, my voice remained steady, without a hint of tremor. I wasn't complaining to seek sympathy, I was simply stating the facts. While I talked, Mr. Warren listened in silence. His face grew darker and darker. His hands, resting on his knees, clenched so tightly that his veins stood out. When I finished, he sighed deeply, saying nothing. That sigh seemed to contain all the disappointment and pain in the world. After a long moment, he looked at me. His eyes were a mixture of pity and guilt. "Ellie, I'm sorry," he said in a hoarse voice. "I've been a coward. I knew your mother-in-law wasn't a good person, but for the sake of the family, for appearances, I chose silence. I didn't know my silence would cause you so much pain." "I don't blame you, Dad," I replied. "I just want to ask you one thing. Are you willing to join me now to expose all of this? To seek justice for me, and for that lost child?" A determination I had never seen before flashed in Mr. Warren's eyes. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Just one thing," I said, leaning closer to him. "Trust me and follow my plan. I promise I won't disappoint you." My plan was very simple, yet very bold. I wanted to use Mrs. Warren's own conspiracy as a weapon against her. She wanted to play games? Perfect. I would put on a much grander play with her, a play in which I was the director. As a first step, I asked Mr. Warren to call Mrs. Warren and tell her that Julian, upon learning of Isabelle's miscarriage, was devastated and despondent. Mr. Warren was to play the role of the husband trying to console his wife. He was to tell her that what's done is done, and the most important thing now was for Isabelle to recover quickly so she could give the family another legitimate heir. He also had to hint that Julian was completely disappointed in me and seemed eager for a divorce. Mr. Warren played his part perfectly over the phone. Mrs. Warren, upon hearing this, let out a sigh of relief. She believed everything was going according to her plan, that I still knew nothing, and that Julian was completely on her side. She suspected nothing and even cheerfully told Mr. Warren she would buy the best restorative foods for her future daughter-in-law. As a second step, I began my own performance. I pretended to be a wife consumed by grief and regret. I went to Julian's room, crying, and apologized for not taking good care of him. I told him I was too focused on my job and had neglected the family. I promised him I would change, that I would be a good wife. Julian, caught between his own guilt and my surprising change of attitude, suspected nothing. He even held my hand and consoled me, saying it wasn't my fault. I also went to Isabelle's room, bringing her fruit and chicken soup. I sat by her side and, with teary eyes, took her hand. Isabelle, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I purposely left the sentence unfinished. Isabelle, who had already received my instructions, also acted perfectly. She burst into tears and said, "Sister-in-law, it's my fault. I betrayed your trust." We put on a moving scene of reconciliation between sisters-in-law. And, of course, that scene reached Mrs. Warren's ears. She became even more euphoric. She believed I had completely given up, that I was trying to curry favor with her to save my marriage. The trap was perfectly set. All the actors were in their places. The mother-in-law, drunk on her victory, had no idea that the web my father-in-law and I had secretly woven was slowly closing in around her. And the biggest fish swimming straight into that net was she herself. In the following days, I continued to gather crucial evidence. I asked a friend who works at a phone company to get me all the call logs and text messages between Mrs. Warren, Julian, and Isabelle from the past year. The evidence clearly exposed their scheme, from organizing Julian's business trips which were actually getaways with Isabelle to discussing ways to get money from me. Everything was ready. I was just waiting for the right moment, a stage grand enough to bring down the curtain on this farce. And the opportunity came sooner than I thought. Mrs. Warren, in her arrogance, decided to throw a party at home to celebrate Julian and Isabelle's recovery from the accident. She invited all the close relatives and friends. Her goal was obvious: to use the occasion to publicly humiliate me and pave the way for Isabelle. She didn't know that the party she had so carefully prepared would be the very stage I had been waiting for. It would be the place where all the dirty secrets would come to light. The party was held on a Saturday night in the very house I had helped pay a fortune for. The house was lavishly decorated, the lights sparkled, and the atmosphere was bustling. Mrs. Warren, in a dark red velvet suit, moved through the crowd, greeting everyone with a wide smile. She looked like a queen presiding over a victory banquet. Julian and Isabelle had also been discharged. Julian wore an elegant suit, though his face was still pale. He walked by my side, occasionally saying a few words of concern, perfectly playing the part of a repentant husband. Isabelle, in an immaculate white dress, sat in a corner, feigning fragility and pity. All the compassionate gazes of the relatives were directed at her. I, the protagonist of this failed farce, simply wore a simple black dress with light makeup to hide my fatigue. I moved around the party, serving tea and drinks, fulfilling my role as a devoted daughter-in-law and generous wife. No one noticed that behind my resigned smile, a storm was brewing. When all the guests had arrived and the party was in full swing, Mrs. Warren stood up solemnly, raised her wine glass, and spoke loudly. "Today, on behalf of my family, I want to thank everyone who has come from afar to share our joy. Recently, our family went through a great scare. My son and my adopted daughter were in an unfortunate accident, but thanks to the blessings of our ancestors and the help of heaven, they have both overcome the crisis." She paused and looked at me with arrogance. "I also take this opportunity to thank my daughter-in-law, Eleanor Hayes. Although there have been some misunderstandings in their marriage, during these difficult times, she has cared for and treated her husband and sister-in-law with great devotion. She is a truly filial daughter-in-law." The room erupted in applause. People looked at me with admiration, praising my tolerance and generosity. Mrs. Warren smiled triumphantly. She had successfully built the image of a reasonable mother-in-law, of a harmonious and happy family. I had become a tool to enhance her own reputation. But she didn't know that her play was about to end. When almost everyone had finished dinner, Mrs. Warren stood up again. This time, her voice was a bit more serious. "Friends, today, Besides celebrating my children's recovery, I have another important announcement to make. The room fell silent. She cleared her throat and looked at me intently. The relationship between Julian and Ellie has suffered many cracks over this time, and they are both exhausted. I believe it's time for them to let each other go. Let each other go. Those words, though spoken softly, sounded like a final sentence. People started whispering. She raised her hand to silence them. But our family is a respectable family. Ellie has been our daughter-in-law for 5 years, and even if she hasn't had merits, she has worked hard. Therefore, after the divorce, our family has decided to give Ellie a compensation of $16,500 as a small help for the girl to start a new life. And this house where the couple lived is our family's property, so naturally, Julian will continue to manage it. $16,500, and the house was their family's property. Her audacity was beyond my imagination. The house I had bought with over $165,000 had now become their family's property, and my 5 years of effort, money, and youth were only worth $16,500. I saw Isabelle's mocking smile and Julian's triumphant look. They were waiting for me to cry, to beg, or to make a scene. But I didn't. I stood up slowly, walked to the front, and faced everyone. I didn't look at Mrs. Warren, but directly at my father-in-law, Richard Warren, the last remaining conscience in this family. Dad, uncles, aunts, everyone, I began to speak. My voice wasn't loud, but it resonated clearly throughout the room. May I say a few words? Mrs. Warren tried to interrupt me, but Mr. Warren raised his hand to stop her. Let her speak, he said. I appreciate my mother-in-law's generosity. I turned to Mrs. Warren. A cold smile played on my lips. $16,500 is a lot of money, but I don't think I'll need it. I paused, scanned everyone with my gaze, and then continued with a firm voice. Because my entire fortune, my husband's, and probably this entire family's fortune, is about to disappear down to the last cent. The whole room was in an uproar. People looked at me in disbelief. Mrs. Warren screamed, "What are you talking about? Have you gone mad?" "I haven't gone mad," I replied. My voice was terrifyingly calm. "I'm just telling the truth. A truth that I believe everyone here needs to know." I turned and gave a signal to someone no one expected. The living room door opened, and in walked none other than Dr. Matthew Carter in his white coat. Behind him followed 2 uniformed police officers. The festive atmosphere of the party froze in an instant. Everyone was speechless, not understanding what was happening. The appearance of Dr. Matt Carter and the 2 police officers turned the family party into a makeshift courtroom. All eyes shifted from surprise and curiosity to confusion and fear. Mrs. Warren was the first to react. She leaped up, pointed a finger at me, and shrieked. "You! Why did you call the police? Are you trying to make a scene here?" "I'm not here to make a scene," I replied, my voice still surprisingly calm. "I've just brought some people to testify to the truth." Dr. Matt Carter stepped forward. His face was solemn. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Matthew Carter, Chief of Emergency Services at City General Hospital. I'm not here today as a doctor, but as a witness." He turned to Julian and Isabelle, who were frozen in their chairs. "Mr. Julian Warren, Miss Isabelle Warren, do you remember me?" Julian and Isabelle lowered their heads, not daring to look at him. Dr. Carter continued. "Both of you were brought to the hospital after a car accident. Blood tests revealed that Mr. Warren's blood alcohol content was over the legal limit. You were driving under the influence, endangering your life and the lives of others. That is a crime with criminal liability." One of the police officers beside him nodded in confirmation. "We have sufficient evidence to press charges. Mr. Warren, you will have to take legal responsibility for your actions." Mrs. Warren staggered and nearly fell. She never would have imagined that the accident she considered simple bad luck had legal implications. But that was just the beginning. I stepped forward and took a stack of papers from Dr. Carter's hand. "Friends," my voice rang out, "my husband driving drunk may have been a momentary mistake, but there are other, systematically calculated mistakes that cannot be forgiven." I held up the receipt from the Golden Horizon Resort and Spa. "This is the receipt from the romantic getaway of my husband and my sister-in-law, Miss Isabelle Warren, just before the accident. The total cost was nearly $3,300, paid with the family credit card I gave my husband, which is linked to my bank account." Murmurs spread through the crowd. People looked at Julian and Isabelle with contempt. "And that's not all," I continued. pulling out the bank statements I had prepared. For the past year, my husband has been secretly transferring money from our joint account to a secret account in Isabelle Warren's name. The total exceeds $55,000. This money was used for Miss Torres to buy luxury goods, travel, and pay the down payment on a luxury apartment. All with the money I earned with my own blood, sweat, and tears. You're making this up. Mrs. Warren screamed. That can't be true. Whether I'm making it up or not, these numbers don't lie, I replied, placing the statements on the table. If my mother-in-law doesn't believe me, she can check with the bank directly. And more importantly, I paused and stared at a trembling Isabelle. Perhaps that money was for the expenses of the pregnancy of the heir this whole family was expecting, right, Isabelle? My words were like a bomb in the middle of the room. Everyone gasped, unable to believe what they were hearing. Isabelle pregnant with Julian's child? Mrs. Warren looked at her son and then at Isabelle in disbelief. She knew they were seeing each other, but she probably didn't even know about the pregnancy herself. Isabelle burst into tears and buried her face on the table. Her silence was the most eloquent confession. At that moment, another woman stood up from the crowd. It was the wife of Julian's cousin. She approached Isabelle and said in a compassionate voice, "Isabelle, is it true? Tell us all." Then she turned to me, her eyes full of apology. "Ellie, I'm sorry. I knew about Julian and Isabelle for a long time. I tried to stop them several times, but they wouldn't listen. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid of breaking up the family." The cousin's wife's confession was like another stab in my already shattered heart. Not just the immediate family, but other relatives knew too. They had hidden it together, taken me for a fool together. But there was no time for sadness now. I had to finish this play. I looked at Julian, who was sitting like a stone statue, without a single word of explanation or apology. "Julian," I called his name in a chilling voice. "Don't you have anything to say?" Julian lifted his head and looked at me with empty eyes. "Ellie, But he couldn't continue, because at that moment, my father-in-law, Richard Warren, who had been silent since the beginning, suddenly stood up. He walked towards Julian without a word and, to everyone's astonishment, raised his hand and delivered a resounding slap across the cheek of the son he had always been so proud of. The red mark of 5 fingers was imprinted on his face. "You animal!" he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" That slap wasn't just for Julian. I knew it was Mr. Warren's belated apology and regret towards me. The play was coming to an end. But could one slap erase all the wounds? Would the revealed truth bring me peace? Richard Warren's slap was like a bell that woke everyone from their stupor. The tense atmosphere in the room turned to chaos. Mrs. Warren, who had been stunned for a moment, finally reacted. But instead of acknowledging her son's guilt, she lunged at me, her eyes bloodshot. "It's all your fault, you barren woman. If you had given this house a grandchild, Julian wouldn't have looked for another woman." Her cruel words were like poison, rubbing salt in the deepest wound of my heart. For the past 5 years, Julian and I had visited countless clinics. The doctors said we were both healthy, that the time just hadn't come. I silently endured the pressure from my in-laws, drinking countless bitter herbal concoctions in the hope of having a child. And now, that legitimate desire was turned into my sin, the excuse for her son's infidelity. "Mom!" Julian shouted. It was probably the first time in his life he had raised his voice to his mother. "Stop it." But Mrs. Warren had already lost her mind. She continued to insult and humiliate me with the most hurtful words. "I'm telling you, don't think you've won. You think you've won by exposing Isabelle? She was pregnant. Pregnant with my son's child. You're nothing but a barren woman. You'll be kicked out of this house soon." Just then, a deep, powerful voice boomed, silencing all the noise. "You shut your mouth right now." It was Richard Warren. He walked over and stood in front of me, facing his wife. His face was red with anger. "Haven't you had enough? Do you still consider yourself a human being? Ellie has put up with you and this entire family for 5 years. Isn't that enough? And now you have to stomp on her wounds. You're taking her side?" Mrs. Warren stammered. "She's the daughter-in-law, it's normal for her to endure. Who told her she couldn't have children? Couldn't have children?" Mr. Warren gave a bitter smile. That smile contained a profound sadness. "Are you sure it's her fault? Or is it because of your precious little boy?" Mr. Warren's words plunged the room back into silence. Everyone was bewildered, not understanding what he meant. Mrs. Warren was also stunned. What do you mean? Mr. Warren didn't answer his wife. He turned to Julian, who was hunched over and trembling. Julian, speak up. Tell everyone here the truth. How many years have you been deceiving everyone, including your wife? It's time for you to face your cowardice. Dad, Julian stammered, his face as white as wax. He lifted his head and looked at me. In his eyes, I saw extreme desperation and shame. Dad, please, he begged. Mr. Warren, determined not to let him escape, said firmly, if you don't speak today, don't ever call me Dad again. Under the pressure from his father, and perhaps from years of accumulated guilt, Julian finally broke down. He fell to his knees on the floor and began to sob like a child. It's my fault. It's all my fault, he said, between sobs. I can't have children. That confession was like a lightning bolt, leaving the entire room in shock. Mrs. Warren swayed. She grabbed the arm of a chair, her eyes wide with disbelief. What did you say? Say it again. 3 years ago, test results confirmed that I'm sterile due to complications from mumps I had as a child. Julian continued, crying. His voice was choked. I didn't have the courage to tell anyone. I was scared. Scared Mom would be disappointed, that Ellie would leave me. So I hid it from everyone. I stood there, listening to his words, feeling the world spin around me. Sterile. He was the one who was sterile. And for all these years, he had let me bear the pressure alone. He had let me believe it was my fault. He had allowed his mother to blame and humiliate me. He was an unforgivable coward. But then, an even more terrible question crossed my mind. If Julian was sterile, then whose child was Isabelle carrying? I turned to look at Isabelle, who was sitting rigidly in her chair, her face as white as paper. Everyone seemed to be thinking the same thing. All eyes were fixed on her. Mrs. Warren opened her mouth, her voice trembling. Isabelle. The child you were carrying. It wasn't Julian's? Isabelle didn't answer, just shook her head vigorously as thick tears rolled down her cheeks. The air in the room became unbreathable. One secret had been revealed only to give way to an even more monstrous secret. It seemed this play wasn't over yet. It had dark corners and truths that no one had foreseen. And I knew that to unveil the final secret, I had to do one thing that would decide the fate of everyone in that room. Julian's confession changed everything. The fact that he was sterile was not only a shock to his family but also raised a terrible, gigantic question. If it wasn't Julian's child, whose baby was Isabelle expecting? All the attention, all the gazes of suspicion and accusation, now focused on Isabelle Warren. She was huddled in her chair, her face soaked with tears, trembling like a leaf in the wind. She didn't dare to lift her head to look at anyone. Speak. Tell me whose child that was. Mrs. Warren was the first to break the silence. She lunged at Isabelle, grabbed her by the hair, and screamed like a wounded animal. You've deceived our entire family. What bastard did you sleep with behind my son's back? Isabelle just cried and pleaded. No, ma'am, no, please. Mr. Warren and some relatives rushed to pull Mrs. Warren away. The room plunged back into chaos. Amidst that frantic scene, I was the only one who remained calm. I no longer hated Isabelle. Instead, I pitied her. She was also a victim. A pawn in Mrs. Warren's game and Julian's cowardice. But compassion didn't mean forgiveness. The truth had to come out. I walked over to Isabelle and sat beside her. I didn't shout or accuse her. I simply placed a hand on her shoulder and said in a soft but firm voice, Isabelle, look at me. Isabelle slowly lifted her head. Her swollen, fear-filled eyes met mine. I don't blame you, I said. I know you've suffered a lot too. But you can't stay silent any longer. You have to tell the truth, not just for yourself, but for the child you were carrying. He wasn't at fault. He has a right to know who his father is. My words seemed to touch the last shred of conscience left in Isabelle. She looked at me, then at Julian on the floor, and then at Mrs. Warren being held back by others. Finally, as if she had gathered all her courage, she took a deep breath. It was Mr. Richards. The words Mr. Richards were barely a whisper, but their impact was like that of an atomic bomb. The room fell into a deathly silence. Everyone looked in disbelief at my father-in-law, Richard Warren, the patriarchal, dignified man who, moments before, had defended me and reprimanded his son. You're lying. Mrs. Warren screamed hoarsely. How dare you slander your father-in-law? I'm not lying, Isabelle broke down crying. It's the truth. Mr. Richard. He She couldn't continue, just buried her face and wept. Richard Warren stood petrified, like a statue. His face went from red to white. He grabbed the table, staggering, to keep from falling. "No, it can't be," he murmured helplessly. I myself couldn't believe what I had just heard. It was too absurd. It surpassed all imagination. It had gone from a common infidelity story to a terrible tragedy of incest. But then I remembered small details I had previously overlooked. I remembered the times Mr. Warren looked at Isabelle in a strange way. It wasn't the look of an adoptive father to his daughter. I remembered the times he bought her expensive gifts for no apparent reason. And I remembered the conversation I had overheard between Mr. Warren and Mrs. Warren when he said, "Do you think I don't know about Julian and Isabelle?" At that moment, I thought he only knew about their affair, but maybe he knew more. Maybe he didn't just know, he was a part of it. "Proof. What proof do you have?" Mrs. Warren shouted, clinging to her last hope. "Or are you just talking nonsense to blame someone else?" "Proof." Trembling, Isabelle fumbled in her purse and pulled out an old cell phone. In here. There are text messages." Just then, Mr. Warren, who had been motionless, suddenly moved. He lunged at Isabelle to snatch the phone. "Give me that, you shameless girl. Do you want to ruin this entire family?" But I was faster. The moment Isabelle mentioned the messages, I had anticipated Mr. Warren's move. I stepped in and blocked his hand. A struggle ensued. The phone flew from Mr. Warren's grasp and landed in mine. I caught it mid-air. "Don't even think about it," Mr. Warren roared, lunging at me like a beast. But Dr. Matt Carter and the two police officers intervened in time. They had been waiting outside the door. At my request, Mr. Richard Warren. "Calm down," one of the officers ordered, firmly gripping his arm. "Any act of obstructing justice will be punished by law." Mr. Warren struggled helplessly. His dignified, patriarchal air had completely vanished, leaving only the fear and madness of a discovered criminal. I clutched the phone in my hand. I felt my heart pound. The last veil of secrecy was about to be lifted, and I knew the truth it contained would be the final stab that would completely destroy the hypocrisy and sin of this family. Isabelle's old cell phone burned in my hand like a hot coal. It wasn't just an electronic device, it was Pandora's box, containing the darkest secret of the Warren family, the final, irrefutable proof. The police held Mr. Warren. He was no longer shouting, just panting, shooting me a look that mixed hatred and desperation. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by Isabelle's sobs and Mrs. Warren's ragged breathing. I didn't open the phone right away. I knew what it contained would not only expose Mr. Warren but would also be too great a shock for everyone present. I scanned the horrified relatives, Julian kneeling like a soulless corpse, and Mrs. Warren, now more wretched than a beggar. I opened my mouth. My voice was no longer cold but heavy, laden with a deep sadness. None of us wanted things to come to this. But the truth, no matter how painful, must be revealed. I unlocked the phone. The password was Isabelle's birthday, shockingly simple proof of her complete lack of caution. In the message inbox, a conversation with the contact adoptive father was pinned to the top. I opened it. Hundreds, thousands of messages from over a year. They weren't the loving messages of a father to his daughter. They were words of love, secret dates, jealousy, and dirty calculations. "Isabelle, are you free tonight? Dad will pick you up. Your mother went out of town again. The dress you wore today was beautiful. I love it. Don't go out with that guy. Dad doesn't like him." And the most recent messages, the ones that chilled my blood. "Are you sure it's my child?" "Positive. I calculated the dates exactly. It's impossible for it to be Julian's." "Good. You just relax and take care of yourself. Dad will handle everything. I'll find a way for Julian to accept it as his own. Once we get rid of Ellie, you will be the lady of this house. All the assets will end up belonging to us and our child." So, that was it. It was all a play within a play. Julian and Isabelle's infidelity was actually a larger drama directed by Mr. Warren himself. He didn't just want an heir of his own blood, he also wanted to use that child to legally seize my assets through his son. Two birds with one stone, a conspiracy of incest and property appropriation, perfectly hidden under the mask of a patriarchal family. I didn't read the messages aloud. I simply passed the phone silently to the police officer beside me. "Officer, here is the evidence." The officer took the phone and examined it. His face grew increasingly serious. He said something to his partner, and they both approached Mr. Warren. Mr. Richard Warren, we have sufficient evidence to investigate you on charges of incest and conspiracy to commit fraud. You will have to come with us to the station. Two cold handcuffs snapped shut on Mr. Warren's wrists. The dry, metallic click echoed in the room like a judge's gavel, sentencing the end of everything. Mr. Warren no longer resisted, he just stood there, his head bowed. All his dignity and patriarchal air had been shattered. As they led him out past Mrs. Warren, she seemed to come to her senses. She clung to her husband's arm, crying inconsolably. Honey, say it's not true. Tell me Isabelle is lying. But Mr. Warren didn't have the courage to look his wife in the eye. He just remained silent. His silence was the most painful confession. Mrs. Warren let go of his arm and collapsed to the floor, weeping without tears. The man she had lived with for decades, the man she had always respected and admired, was a demon in human skin. The heir she so longed for was the fruit of a sinful relationship between her husband and the daughter she had raised. There was no crueler truth, no greater humiliation. I watched the scene without a shred of satisfaction, only an infinite sadness. A family that, out of pure greed and selfishness, had sunk into an abyss of sin and destruction. I turned to look at Julian. He was still kneeling there, his gaze lost in the void. He probably realized at that moment that he too had been a poor puppet in his father's play. He had lost everything: his wife, his mistress, the child he thought was his, and the father he had always respected. I said nothing more. I just turned and walked out. Dr. Matt Carter was waiting for me outside. He draped his jacket over my shoulders as if to hide the trembling I was trying to suppress. Let's go, Ellie. It's all over. Yes, I replied in a hoarse voice. It's really over. I left that house without looking back even once, leaving behind a broken family, leaving behind 5 years of my youth filled with pain. The sky outside was brightening. A new day was beginning, and I knew that my life, from this day forward, would also turn to a new chapter. The curtain fell on the tragic end of the Warren family. The sound of police sirens faded into the distance, taking Mr. Torres and his sinful secret with them. The luxurious house, which moments before hosted a party, was plunged into a sepulchral silence, broken only by Mrs. Warren's heartbroken cries and the resigned sighs of those who remained. I didn't stay to witness the collapse. Dr. Matt Carter led me away right after Mr. Warren was taken. The car drove through familiar streets, but my mind was a whirlwind of mixed emotions. I felt relief, pain, and a strangely hollow emptiness. What are you going to do now? Dr. Carter broke the silence. I don't know, I replied, leaning my head against the window. The streetlights streaked by like shooting stars. I suppose I'll need a long time to forget all this. Don't try to forget, Ellie, Dr. Carter said in a warm voice. Face it. Learn to live with it and turn it into a part of your strength. You were incredibly brave. You did something not many people could do. I didn't answer, just managed a faint smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt a small warmth in my frozen heart. Dr. Carter took me to an extended stay hotel he had booked for me. Stay here for a while. Lay low. I'll take care of things at the hospital. Don't worry about anything. Just rest. I looked at him, feeling infinite gratitude. How can I? There's nothing to thank me for, he smiled. We're colleagues and friends. It's normal to help each other. Besides, I've learned a lot from you about strength and resilience. In the following days, I lived in absolute silence. I cut off contact with everyone. I didn't read newspapers or check social media. I needed time for myself, to piece my soul back together. The Warren family case became a scandal that rocked the community. The media reported on it non-stop, dissecting every aspect of the story. They painted a dramatic picture of a reputable family, rotten from the inside, filled with incest, fraud, and betrayal. My name was also mentioned constantly, but with a completely different image. They called me the Iron Wife, the Rose with Thorns, a symbol of a woman standing up against injustice. But those titles didn't interest me. The only thing that interested me now was my future. Where to go? What to return to? Should I continue being a doctor? 1,000 unanswered questions. A week later, my lawyer came. He brought good news. Dr. Hayes, Mr. Warren has agreed to the divorce on the terms we proposed. He's relinquishing all rights to the house and other assets. Additionally, he will pay a considerable sum for emotional damages. Why did he agree so easily? I was surprised. Because he had no other choice, the lawyer explained. After his father's arrest, his family has fallen apart. His mother is in a psychiatric facility due to the shock, and the family business is on the brink of bankruptcy. He has neither the spirit nor the money to pursue a legal battle. Besides, with the evidence we have, he would certainly lose in court. Just like that, my marriage ended quickly and cleanly on paper. But the wounds in my heart would probably never heal. At the same time, news of Isabelle also reached me. After everything came to light, she went to live with a distant aunt. I didn't know what decision she would make about the child she was expecting, and I didn't want to know. Her life no longer had anything to do with me. Time flew by. A month, 2, half a year. I gradually regained my balance. I went back to work at the hospital. The emergencies, the lives hanging by a thread, made me realize that my pain, however great, was just a grain of sand in the desert of life. There were people far more unfortunate than me, and there were more meaningful things to do than to be anchored in the past. I threw myself into my work as a form of healing. I took training courses to improve my specialty. I took on the most difficult and complex cases. My dedication and talent were recognized. Soon after, I was promoted to Deputy Chief of the Emergency Department. My life gradually entered a new orbit. A life without Julian, without in-laws, without deceit or calculation, just work, good colleagues, and peaceful days. Sometimes I thought of Julian, but not with love or hatred, but as one remembers a stranger who has passed through one's life. I heard that after the divorce and the family's bankruptcy, he had to sell the house and car to pay off debts. He started from scratch, with a hard and difficult life. That was the price for his cowardice and betrayal. And I found peace. But sometimes, in the deep, silent nights, when I faced the darkness and loneliness, I wondered if I could ever love again. Could my heart, once broken into 1,000 pieces, ever beat for someone again? There was no answer. Perhaps I needed more time. But one thing was clear. If another man entered my life, he had to be completely different. He didn't need to be rich or handsome. He just needed to have one thing Julian never had, a sincere heart. 2 years after that storm ravaged my life, it truly opened a new chapter. I was no longer Dr. Eleanor Hayes with sad eyes and a forced smile. I had learned to laugh again, a genuine laugh that came from inner peace. My job as Deputy Chief of the ER was demanding, but it brought me joy and meaning. Every patient I saved made my life feel more valuable. Through my pain, I had learned to understand and share the pain of others. I no longer lived in the hotel. With the settlement money and my savings, I bought a small, beautiful apartment with a sun-filled balcony. It was my true home, a peaceful haven I could return to every day after hard work. I made new friends, established new relationships, joined a book club and yoga classes. I learned to love and care for myself more, both physically and mentally. Sometimes, through former colleagues or gossip, news of the Warren family reached me. Mrs. Warren, after receiving psychiatric treatment, had returned to her old suburban house, where she lived in silence. There was nothing left of her former image of power and sharpness, only a lonely old woman. Mr. Warren received a sentence fitting his crimes, and Julian was still struggling to make a living. Someone said they saw him working as a delivery driver, another as a janitor in a building. He had to pay for his mistakes with the rest of his life. I no longer cared about them, the past was truly behind me. I had forgiven not for them, but for myself, so I wouldn't have to carry the weight of hatred, so I could live a light and serene life. And then, on a beautiful weekend afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was in a bookstore, picking out some new medical textbooks, when I heard a deep, warm voice beside me. "Dr. Hayes, what a coincidence to see you here." I turned, a little surprised. It was Dr. Matt Carter. Instead of his white coat, he wore a simple shirt and jeans. He looked much younger and more relaxed than at the hospital. "Hi, Matt," I smiled. "Small world. Do you enjoy reading?" he asked, pointing to the books I was holding. "Yes, it's been a habit since I was a child." We started talking, not about work or patients, but about books, music, common hobbies. I was surprised to discover that he was not only an excellent doctor and a respected chief but also a very interesting man, with deep knowledge and a delicate sensibility. The conversation went on longer than expected. When we left the bookstore, the sky was already getting dark. "Can I buy you a coffee?" he proposed with a somewhat shy look. I hesitated for a moment. It was the first time in a long time I had been alone with a man. My heart seemed to have frozen after that storm. But seeing his sincere and warm gaze, I nodded silently. Yes, of course. We sat in a small coffee shop with a bougainvillea vine. The evening light filtered through the leaves, creating a romantic scene. He told me about his family, his youthful dreams, the pressures of being a doctor. I, for the first time, opened up and shared my thoughts and plans with him. Between us, there was no awkwardness or the distance of boss and employee, only the complicity of two souls who had been through a lot. When we parted, he walked me to the parking lot. "Ellie," he said, calling me by my name, no longer Dr. Hayes. "I know this might be too soon, but would you give me a chance to get to know you better?" His sudden confession made my heart race. I didn't know how to respond. I was afraid of being hurt again. But then I remembered my mother's words. Don't close your heart because of people who aren't worth it. I lifted my head and looked at him, at his eyes full of anticipation and hope. I need time," I replied. "I'll wait," he said without a moment's hesitation. "I'll wait until you're ready." He didn't try to hold my hand or add any more flowery words. He just stood there, looking at me with respect and patience. His gentleness sincerely moved me. I drove home, feeling a strange, warm emotion filling my heart. Maybe happiness hadn't abandoned me completely. Maybe after the storm comes the calm. And maybe it was time to give myself a chance to be loved again. One door had closed, but another was swinging wide open. And I knew that behind that door, a good man was waiting for me. My relationship with Matt didn't develop hastily. It was like a stream, flowing gently and naturally into my life. He didn't give me expensive gifts or ostentatious bouquets. He simply stood by my side silently, caring for me with the smallest gestures: a hot cup of coffee in the morning after a grueling night shift, a good book he knew I would like, or just an encouraging message at the right moment. He never asked about my past, but I knew he understood everything. He respected my pain and gave me space to heal on my own. His gentleness and patience gradually melted the ice around my heart. I began to open up more, to share more of my thoughts and dreams with him, and I realized that by his side, I always felt at peace. I could be myself. A year after our reunion in the bookstore, on a warm winter afternoon, he took me to a small rooftop restaurant atop a skyscraper. From there, you could see the entire illuminated city. Under the romantic candlelight, he took a small velvet box out of his pocket. He didn't kneel or utter grandiloquent words. He just looked me in the eyes and said in a deep, sincere voice, "Ellie, over this past year, I've learned so much from you about strength, tolerance, and the will to live. You've made me believe that after the rain, not only does the sun come out, but also the rainbow. Would you like to search for other rainbows with me for the rest of our lives?" He opened the box, and inside was a simple but exquisite platinum ring. It didn't have a large diamond, just a small blue sapphire that sparkled like a star. "I know you don't like flashy things," he said. "This stone is like your eyes, always clear, steady, and with an invisible strength." I looked at him, and tears of happiness streamed down my face. There were no more doubts or fears. I knew this was the man I had been looking for. A man who loved me for who I was, not for what I was or what I had. "Yes, I will," I whispered, choking back tears. He slipped the ring on my finger, and a current of warmth spread through my whole body. We didn't have a big wedding. Our wedding was on a secluded beach with only our best friends as witnesses. I wore a simple white wedding dress and, holding his hand, I walked on the white sand. The waves crashed, and the sea breeze blew gently. Everything seemed to be blessing us. That day, I truly believed that happiness existed. After getting married, we decided to carry out a project we had been planning for a long time. We created a small charitable foundation called Hope's Anchor to help pay for the surgeries of poor patients with rare diseases. We wanted to use our professional skills and our good fortune to bring life and hope to people less fortunate than us. My life was now full of meaning and joy. I not only had a wonderful husband and a meaningful job but also a real family. Matt's parents were very kind and thoughtful people. They loved me like a daughter, filling all the emotional voids I had suffered. Sometimes I think about my story, about the dark days past. The pain is still there, like a faint scar that will never disappear, but it no longer hurts. I am grateful for the past because that past has made me the person I am today, a stronger, more mature Ellie who values happiness more. And I want to send a message to all the women who have faced, are facing, or will face life's storms. Never give up. Never lose hope. Believe that after every storm, the sun will shine again, and that somewhere, there will always be a good man, and a true happiness waiting for you if only you have the courage to walk through the darkness and embrace the light.